You walk into your kitchen at 2 in the morning for a glass of well water. You turn on the light, and you see it, a brown shape darting under the refrigerator. It is a terrible feeling. Your skin crawls just standing there in the dark. The next day, you drive into town. You go to the hardware store and look at the long row of metal cans selling chemical bug spray. You pick one up and read the back. The heavy black letters tell you to wash your skin immediately if it touches you. They tell you to keep it far away from pets. Now I want you to sit with this. You are about to spray a synthetic nerve agent on the exact floor where your dog sleeps. You are going to put it on the linoleum where your toddler drops a piece of bread and puts it back in their mouth. For $3, you can buy a dust made from the bottom of an ancient lake. It kills roaches mechanically. It contains 0 chemicals. It is safe for mammals, and it works forever. My name is Levi Stoltzfus. I am Amish, and I farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Today, we are going to talk about keeping roaches out of your home. I will be honest with you right at the start, the way I always am. This powder does not kill bugs the second it touches them. If you want a chemical that drops a roach instantly on contact, you will have to buy the poison. What we do takes up to 48 hours to dry them out. But honest is better than impressive. If you use this, they will never come back. The English spray their baseboards with expensive chemicals year after year, even as the bugs seem to get stronger. I see the white trucks from the pest control companies driving up and down the county roads every summer. But why do those big companies actually prefer that you use their sprays instead of a natural mechanical powder? We will look at that later. 2 summers ago, my neighbor David had a terrible problem in his pantry. He is a good man, an English fellow who works in town. He hired a commercial exterminator to handle it. They came out in July and charged him $340 for an initial residential treatment. The man in the heavy boots came in with a metal pressure tank and sprayed wet foam along every baseboard in the house. David had to put his dog out in the yard for the afternoon. The house smelled like harsh chemicals for 3 days. The bugs died. David thought the problem was solved. By September, they were back. They were crawling over the flour bags again, bold as brass. David did not understand it. He thought the poison had just washed away when he mopped. He did not know what the university people out in Indiana have been testing and proving for years. The German cockroach is a very fast breeder. When you spray a common commercial insecticide, like a pyrethroid, you kill the weak ones. But a few of them survive. They have a slight genetic resistance to that specific poison. Those survivors hide deep in the wall voids where the spray never reaches. They breed. In just a few months, they pass that immunity directly to their offspring. The bugs that walk out from under the refrigerator in September are not the same bugs. They are a new generation, and they are genetically immune to the exact chemical you sprayed in July. The spray you bought last year might not even work this year. David was buying temporary relief. He was on a treadmill. When he called the company back in September, they told him he needed a quarterly contract to keep them away. That is another $150 every 3 months. He was looking at nearly $1,000 a year. He was paying them to train the roaches in his house to survive poison. A 4-pound bag of the dust I am going to show you costs about $15 at the farm supply store. You only need a few ounces to treat an entire kitchen properly. That brings the cost to right around $3. And because this dust kills the bug physically rather than chemically, the insect can never build a genetic immunity to it. You cannot breed a resistance to broken glass. To stop fighting a losing chemical war, we have to fight the roach on a physical level. We have to look at how the insect is built. If you have ever had the displeasure of sweeping up a dead cockroach, you know they have a hard, slick outer shell. But that hard shell is not actually what keeps them alive. Every October on the farm, we harvest the winter squash. We pull the butternut and the blue Hubbard from the vines, and we lay them out on boards in the sun to cure. The sun hardens the outside skin. It seals the vegetable. If we do that right, Those squash will sit down in the dark root cellar for 6 months and stay perfectly sweet and heavy. But if a mouse gets in the cellar and scratches the skin of one of those squashes with its teeth, the seal is broken. The moisture leaks out into the air. Within a week, that squash will shrivel up and rot. A cockroach survives exactly the same way. The air inside your house in the middle of winter, when the furnace is running, is terribly dry. It is a desert to a small bug. The only reason a cockroach can survive under your kitchen cabinets is because of a very specific layer on its shell. The university entomologists call it the epicuticle. It is a slick, waxy layer, a coating of fat and lipids that completely wraps the insect and locks the moisture inside its body. If you can find a way to strip away that wax, the roach cannot survive the dry air of your home. It will lose its water and it will die. I have a wooden bowl sitting here on my workbench. Inside it is a fine white powder. If I pinch it between my calloused fingers, it feels very soft. It feels almost exactly like baking flour. But it is not flour, it is stone. We call it diatomaceous earth. This is not something mixed up in a vat at a chemical plant. It is a naturally occurring, soft sedimentary rock that gets mined straight from the earth and milled down into this fine dust. It is made up of about 80 to 90% silica, and that silica comes from something quite remarkable. It is made from the fossilized remains of tiny, single-celled algae. They call them diatoms. Millions of years ago, these microscopic creatures lived in ancient bodies of water. When they died, their shells settled to the bottom in deep layers. Over time, the water dried up, the earth shifted, and all those billions of tiny shells turned into a chalky, white rock. That is what is in this bowl, the bottom of an ancient lake. It feels soft to my hand because my skin is thick and tough, but to a cockroach, this powder is a field of microscopic jagged glass. When a roach walks through a dusting of this powder, two things happen at once. First, the sharp edges of those crushed fossils physically scratch the bug's belly and legs. They score right through that waxy epicuticle. Second, the powder is incredibly porous and dry. It acts like a sponge. As it scratches the shell, the dust absorbs the protective lipids right out of the wax. The shield is gone. The moisture inside the bug simply evaporates. The roach walks back into the wall void. It has the dust on its legs. Roaches groom themselves. When they try to clean the dust off, they just rub the microscopic glass further into their joints. Over the next 48 hours, the insect begins to rapidly dehydrate. It cannot stop the process. Within 2 days, it is dead. It is not poisoned. It is mechanically emptied of water. This is exactly why they can never become immune to it. A bug can change its internal chemistry over a few generations to survive a wet nerve spray, but it cannot change the physical fact that its body needs water to live. If you put this down, you turn your baseboards into a dry trap they cannot adapt to. You are using the earth to protect your home. But this powder only works if you buy the exact right bag. When you go to the hardware or farm supply store, you must read the bag and ensure it says food grade. You must never buy the earth meant for swimming pool filters. There are 2 distinct types of this powder, and the difference between them is a matter of safety. The pool filter grade is taken from the earth and sent to a factory, where it is baked at nearly 2,000 degrees. That extreme heat melts the tiny fossil shells together and changes the silica from soft and natural to hard and crystalline. It works very well for trapping dirt in water pipes, but the safety regulators are very clear about it. That crystallized dust is a severe respiratory hazard. If you breathe it in, it can permanently damage your lungs. You must never bring the pool grade into your house for pest control. Leave that bag on the shelf. You want the bag that says food grade. That means the rock was milled straight out of the ground, completely unheated and natural. The government regulates this grade very strictly. Out here in the valley, we buy it in 50-pound heavy paper sacks. When a farmer pulls his harvest of field corn out of the autumn cold and pours 1,000 bushels into a massive steel bin for the winter, he faces a very real threat. A grain weevil can get into that bin, eat through the harvest, and turn good corn into useless dust by spring. So the farmer mixes this food-grade diatomaceous earth right into the food supply as the grain goes into the silo. It kills the weevils mechanically, but it leaves the corn perfectly safe for livestock and for people to eat. It is completely non-toxic to mammals. Our bodies and our pets' bodies are built differently than a bug's. If my farm dog walks through the barn, steps in a pile of this white powder, and later sits on the porch and licks it off his paws, he is perfectly fine. The agricultural standards approve it for exactly that reason. It passes right through him. I have my bag right here on the workbench. The paper is stitched across the top with a heavy white string. When I pull the string and open it up, the powder inside is pure white. It looks almost exactly like confectioner's sugar, but we know it is microscopic stone. Before we start pulling this powder out of the bag to use it, I need you to understand something. How you put this down on your floor matters far more than the powder itself. I will show you the biggest mistake people make when putting this down in just a minute. First, let us do the math on the materials. A 4-pound bag of food-grade earth cost me $15 at the co-op, but to secure a large farmhouse kitchen for the entire year, you only need maybe a cup of it, a few ounces. That breaks down to about $2.50 worth of powder for the job. To put it down correctly, you do not need to buy a fancy brass applicator or an expensive piece of exterminator equipment. You just need the right cheap tool. You can go to a dollar store and buy a small makeup brush, a wide one with very soft bristles. The reason I tell people to get a makeup brush is because of how fine the hair is. You do not want a stiff nylon paintbrush. A paintbrush will flick the powder into the air and make a mess. A soft brush lets you gently tap the dust exactly where it needs to go. If you do not want to use a brush, you can find a little plastic squeeze duster with a narrow plastic tip for about 50 cents. I keep one out in the woodshed just for this purpose. $2.50 for the powder, 50 cents for the brush, $3 total. Waste nothing. Once you have the right tool, you have to apply it where the bugs actually travel. The biggest mistake folks make is how they put the powder on the floor. I have a scrap piece of pine baseboard right here on the bench to show you what I mean. I see people take their bag of earth, or they take a large metal spoon, and they pour a thick, heavy white line right against the wood. They pile it 1/4 inch high. They think they are building a snow fence. They think the bug will come out from underneath the stove, see that wall of white powder, and have to climb over it to get to the middle of the kitchen. That thick line. Well, let me back up. Think of a deer walking in the timber. If a deer comes to a large fallen log, it usually does not waste the energy to jump it. It just walks around the root ball. A cockroach does the exact same thing. The university extension offices have studied this behavior on camera. A roach is highly sensitive to the terrain it walks on. The tiny hairs on its legs feel everything in the dark. If it walks out and feels a thick pile of loose dust, it knows something is wrong. It will not climb over the pile. It will simply turn and walk around it. A thick barrier of powder is completely useless. The bug will just find another way to the breadcrumbs. The powder must be applied in a near-invisible light dusting. You want it so thin the bug walks through it entirely unknowingly. Here is how we do it. I take this soft makeup brush. I dip just the very tips of the bristles into the ball of earth. I do not scoop it, just a light tap. Then I bring it down to the pine board, right into the crack where the wood meets the floor. I hold it 1 inch above the floorboards, and I firmly tap the handle of the brush with my other finger. It puffs a tiny, faint cloud. The dust settles on the wood like a light frost. It should look like ordinary dust that has naturally settled in a house that has not been swept in a few weeks. That is all you need. You want the bug to walk out of the wall and not even realize the ground has changed. You do not put this in the middle of your kitchen floor where you walk. You put it in the dark, quiet places. Underneath your refrigerator, there is a warm motor Roaches love the heat of that motor. You take your brush and tap a light dusting under the appliance. You pull out the bottom drawer of your oven and puff a little dust into the back corners. You put it in the very back of your dry pantry cabinets. Those are the highways. If you want to keep track of safe, chemical-free methods like this for your home, there is a guide down the description that you can print out and put in your binder. Now, before you start puffing this powder under your stove, we need to talk about your lungs. CC word, even though this food-grade earth is non-toxic to your body, it is still a very fine dust. It is microscopic crushed rock. When you are down on your hands and knees, actively tapping the brush and puffing that dust into the air, you do not want to breathe it in. If you inhale a heavy cloud of any fine dust, whether it is baking flour or wood ash from the stove, it will irritate your lungs and make you cough. When I am putting this down, I tie a cotton handkerchief around my face, or I wear a simple paper mask from the shop. I make sure the dogs and the children are out of the kitchen. I tap the brush under the baseboards. The dust hangs in the air for a few moments, catching the light like motes in a sunbeam. Then I stand up and I wait 5 minutes. I let gravity do its work. Once that powder settles onto the floorboards, it is done. It is heavy enough that normal walking through the kitchen will not stir it back up into the air. 5 minutes later, it is perfectly safe to take the mask off and breathe. It is perfectly safe for the dog to come back in and lay his head on the rug. It is a silent, completely dry trap. But there is one thing in your kitchen that will ruin all this work the moment it touches the powder. Water. I will be honest with you about where this powder fails. If you take your soft brush and you puff a beautiful light layer of dust underneath your kitchen sink, you might think you have protected the cabinet, but if the plumbing trap under your sink has a slow drip and a single drop of water hits that dust, the protection is gone. Diatomaceous earth completely loses its abrasive and absorptive properties if it gets wet. Think of a dry kitchen sponge. If you wipe it across a spill, it pulls the liquid right up. But if you take that same sponge and soak it in a bucket of water first, it cannot absorb anything else. It is full. The earth works the same way. When the microscopic silica gets wet, it turns to mud. The sharp edges soften. It can no longer scratch the bug's shell, and it certainly cannot absorb the waxes from the insect's belly. It must be applied to bone-dry crevices to be effective. If you are mopping your kitchen floor on a Saturday morning with a heavy wet mop and you push that wet yarn hard against the baseboards, you will ruin the dust trap. You will have to wipe the wood clean, wait for the baseboard to dry completely, and apply a fresh puff of powder. You also must have a little patience. If you put the dust down on a Tuesday night, do not expect to wake up on Wednesday morning to a floor completely clear of bugs. The dehydration process takes time. The bug has to walk through the dust, carry it back to the wall void, and slowly lose its moisture. Give it a few days. This brings us back to the question I asked you at the start. The pest control companies know exactly how a cockroach's biology works. They know the insect breeds fast and builds genetic resistance to chemical sprays. They know this soft white powder destroys the bug physically for $3 without any risk of chemical immunity. So, why do they send a man in heavy boots to your house to spray the wet poison instead? It is how they make their living. They are selling you a service that is designed to fail. When they spray the baseboards, the chemical breaks down in the sunlight and air after a few weeks. The surviving bugs breed. A new, stronger generation comes out of the walls. And you have to call the white truck to come back. It is a subscription. They rely on the bugs coming back so they can charge you another $150 in the fall. If they sold you a $3 bag of ancient stone dust and taught you how to tap it under your refrigerator with a makeup brush, the bugs would die. The trap would never degrade as long as it stayed dry. The roaches could never build an immunity to it. The problem would be solved, and you would never need to call them again. A natural mechanical solution is not good for a quarterly billing cycle, but it is very good for your home. It keeps the poison off your floors. It keeps the money in your pocket. Tell me in the comments, What room in your house makes you the most worried about pests? I read every single one. Next time, we are going to look at a simple Amish method to restore a rusted cast iron pan to perfectly non-stick without using harsh chemical strippers. My grandfather used to say the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.